Are chickens themselves paying the price for the low cost of chicken meat, for the cheap chicken in the supermarket? Well, yes and no. I think they are, in the sense that there are absolutely vast numbers of these animals farmed. They're farmed at a low economic margin. They're farmed at a low, what I call a low margin for care. We keep them in environments which don't challenge them in the entire physiological range. We know that there are, in sometimes, quite high levels of disease, debility, mobility problems, restricted behaviours, comparatively small amounts of space. So I think in that sense, yes, chickens are definitely paying the price for the low cost of poultry meat. But in the developed world, or countries in the developing world that are using very intensive systems now, you'll have houses with 20,000, 30,000, up to 40,000 birds in one house. But the average house would probably have 20,000 birds in it now. Birds in most systems live on the ground, and the material that they live on is some available material, and it's usually straw, or in Asia it's rice hulls. It can be things like alfalfa, chopped alfalfa, or wood shavings, and in some countries it's chopped paper. But by far the most common two types are straw or rice hulls and wood shavings. Because so many animals are kept on this substrate, the management is what really makes a difference to the animal. Whether the litter is dry, whether the litter is friable, that means they can move the litter and manipulate it and forage in it and explore in it. If it's not those things, if it becomes sticky or wet, then the birds are in real trouble, because they can't keep themselves clean. They can't do anything but sit on that substrate. And the end result of that, with time, are problems like skin lesions such as pododermatitis, hop problems, breast blister, poor feather cleanliness. I think we've reached a bit of a crisis point where what I call the margin for care is probably inadequate. And probably the best way to express it is in terms of the number of animals that are looked after by one person. Now, if you had a dairy farm and you said, we've got one farmer and he looks after 20,000 animals, you'd say, well, that can barely be possible. Of course, that's not possible. But that's extremely common in the broiler world. You can have one farmer with automated systems. He's looking after many tens of thousands of animals. So his capacity to care for an individual animal is very low, and he hopes and assumes that the automated systems will do that for him. They will feed the animal, they'll water the animal, they'll ventilate the animal, they'll keep the temperature right. And probably for the majority of time, that system works adequately. But the amount of individual care and attention that can be paid to the individual animals is very tiny. And I question whether this margin for care has reached a crisis that we should analyse, we should look at carefully. Are we allowing the care of animals to get too thinly spread? Are we making it very difficult for farmers to actually care for the animals? Is it more important now for them to care for techniques, for mechanisms, for machinery, rather than the concept of actually caring for animals? If you go to, say, Asia, or perhaps South America, where cost of labour is perhaps one of the issues, then you might actually have quite a lot more people involved in the farm, more people in contact with the animals, more people spending time in the animal house, looking at the animals, picking up injured animals, diseased animals. So it's not entirely just about number of animals in a house. It partly depends on how many people you can allow to spend time in contact with the animals. And this, in some ways, is sort of counterintuitive, because I think many believe that standards of care are likely to be lower, for instance, in developing countries. But actually, in some ways, I'm not sure that that's right. I think in countries where labour costs are lower, where more people can spend time in the farm, in contact with the animals, sometimes that degree of care, human care for the animals, can actually be greater, can be improved. Most broilers are now slaughtered between 34 and 40 days of age. Some are taken to greater ages and weights than that, and some are taken to less. But around about the mid-30 number of days. Now just think about that. That's just over a month to take a broiler chick, 1 day old, all the way to the supermarket shelf. It's a phenomenal rate of growth, and actually some of these animals are putting on nearly 100 grams a day for some times during that cycle. We grow them for their breast muscle development. That's the flight muscle, but actually effectively they're incapable of flight. So that's the first major impact. They're now landlocked, flying animals with very large flight muscle development for our benefit. And lameness in broiler chickens falls into two main causes. The first is skeletal shape, is size, is weight, and that causes a moderate amount of lameness in absolutely enormous numbers of birds. Quite a significant percentage of the flock will be affected in some way, behaviourally, functionally, by the change in their body conformation as a result of the weight. But there'll also be a smaller proportion of birds who are very seriously affected by lameness, and this is mostly caused by infections. And these birds, in fact, are not the big, heavy birds. These birds tend to be small, but very compromised. They often sit in the litter. They live, they survive, but they certainly don't thrive, and their quality of life is very poor. They sit and need a feeder. They don't grow, and they're extremely compromised, but they'll often survive the whole production cycle because the farmer doesn't recognise them as welfare impacted. So that's a small proportion of the flock, but globally, internationally, and from the whole global flock, it's an absolutely enormous number of animals that are affected by this higher degree of lameness in the whole international poultry flock. So what I'd like to say is that, in my view, there's very strong evidence that these animals are in discomfort, are in distress, and probably in pain, particularly these animals in the acute upper level lameness categories. So by farming them in intensive systems, we've restricted the range of physiological challenges to which they're experienced. And a farmer might say, well, this is great. You know, we're protecting them from all these challenges. They can devote more of their energies to growing, to producing for me. But if you step back from that a little bit and think what we're actually doing, we're creating environments in which these animals, which have got a whole range of anatomical, physiological, and other preparedness, we're not asking them to use that. And I think that that's a restriction, that's a limitation that finally we will recognise as not only a welfare concern, but also as a conceptual concern, that we're farming animals in systems now that don't challenge them in many ways for the ways in which they're physiologically equipped.